Chapter 6. Simon Lee. Simon Lee slept on a futon in the back bedroom of a third-story walk-up on Lower Haight Street. He didn't hear the knocking at first. It took a while for the sound to penetrate, but when it did, he sat bolt upright, and he flashed that he shouldn't open the door. Ruby would say that a flash like that was a premonition, maybe, but most likely it was just his roommate and his roommate's girlfriend. Out all night zoning through the rave clubs in South of Market, with all those hipster kids hugging each other, dripping with love. Now they were back, probably after a long roam around town, thinking they had just lost the key to the apartment. But really that key was just buried down in the pocket of what's-her-name's print dress, or in her bra, or her shoe, or some damn place. Even so, he kept the chain linked and just cracked the door, peeping down the hall. It was a woman with flame-crazy red hair. "Yeah?"
"I'm looking for a young man named Simon Lee,"
said the redhead.
"That you?"
The sleep was leaving him, and he knew better than to answer that one straight out. "Who can I say is calling?"
"The police,"
she said, and showed her badge.
"I'm just looking for some information."
"I'll go get him," he said. He tried to shut the door, but the lady cop stuck her foot inside.
"Will you let me in?"
"Sure," he said. "I need to shut the door to unhook the chain."
"Are you Simon Lee?"
He didn't answer the question, but rather gestured down to his naked legs. "Let me put on my pants." Simon gave her his best puppy dog look, eye to eye, and he could see she didn't trust him, but also that she didn't have much choice unless she wanted to push the door in. She withdrew her foot, and he shut the door and hurried down the hall. He put on his pants and clambered down the fire escape. He hopped on his Kawasaki, there in the alley, with the bedroll still tied on, and wailed out in the streets while that cop lady outside his door just waited around. It wasn't the thing to do, Simon realized as he drove away. It wasn't smart at all. But when he first came to the city 3 years ago, it had been as a runaway, and his old man in Florida had sent the cops after him. Because he looked younger than he was, and they had his picture on file down at social services or someplace, he kept having the same kind of trouble, so his first impulse had been to ditch. Simon rode out into the Richmond district, taking Balboa Street past all those little houses that looked as though they were made of sand, then stopped in a hamburger joint to get some breakfast. He was still foggy-headed from the night before, and hungry as hell, cursing himself because he had a baby face and a jerk for a father who wouldn't leave him alone, not even now that he was going on 21. While waiting for his burger, he rummaged through a stack of old newspapers some customers had left behind. Nobody had bothered to sort them, or to toss the old ones out, so he came up with one from last Sunday. He'd been gone for a few days, and it didn't much matter to him anyway which one he read. He was settling down to his burger when he happened to glance at the lower corner of the front page. His eyes caught a picture of Zachary Barnes, then a headline that made his heart feel like a big drum in his chest. "Gallery owner shot dead." The article told what he had missed while he was out of town, how Zachary was killed beneath all those paintings, found lying there in a big, colorful pool of blood, and now James Tobin was being held for murder. This freaked Simon, freaked him bad. He wondered what the police really wanted to talk to him about. It didn't matter, he told himself, because he really didn't know anything. He just worked at the gallery. He didn't know anything about Zach and Tobin and their crazy lives. Tobin had hired him off the streets, and the artist had taken him under his wing in some ways. That had been just after Simon had quit his job doing motorcycle delivery, skidding like a maniac on one of those two-stroke aluminum death machines, taking little packages of paper and whatnot all over town for lawyers and other assholes. That scene had gotten old, and working with Tobin had its kicks. Simon stretched canvas for him and pushed brooms and washed paint from brushes. Though Zach hadn't been too crazy about him at first, after a while the guy had warmed up and given him this and that to do around the gallery. Then there was Ruby, Tobin's girl. She was closer to Simon's age, but she had a thing for the older guys. Even so, they got to be friends. Getting silly in the back room, walking down those Soma streets through that crazy traffic, the white noise blasting in their ears. She told him a few things about Zach and Tobin. He'd learned a few more on his own. It was fierce stuff. The gallery, at least, the way those two did it. Like there was an electric moon casting its light all over everything. He had to admit that got him off, especially the way it seemed everybody in town wanted to stand inside that glow. And there he was, Simon Lee, a cool shadow leaning against the wall. Now everything had exploded. Zach was dead, and Tobin was in jail. The cops had probably talked to Ruby by now, and maybe she could tell him what to do. There was no answer at her place, just the machine with Tobin's voice on it, and he didn't want to leave a message. He didn't want to go back to his apartment, so when it got dark, he rode out to Ocean Beach. The city was building a new seawall, and he unrolled his bedroll behind the cement mixer the workers had left parked in the sand. It was a miserable night, partly because of the cold, but also because he kept thinking about Tobin and Ruby and Zach, the whole scene at the gallery, trying to figure out what had happened. Things had just gotten too lively, he guessed. Like one of his old man's crazy schemes back in Florida, always drinking beer and lifting cars, talking baseball in between. Except with these guys, it was Cabernet and Renoir, or some such thing. And instead of his mother hanging out, it was Ruby, flipping back and forth between Tobin and Zach, with himself caught in between. When you got down to it, every place was the same damn swamp. Simon didn't like to think so, but he guessed it was true. And what was he going to do for work now, with the gallery closed? They screwed everything up good, those guys, with their fooling around. In the morning, Simon had nowhere to go, so he headed for the Crazy Z. He spent a few dollars drinking, and while he did, he thought more about Ruby. One day when they were alone in the gallery, he tried to put the moves on her. She'd just given him a big blank face, like she didn't understand, and he'd felt like an idiot. She was sleeping with Tobin, but she was all hung up on Zach, and those two were all she wanted to talk about. He tried to let it go, but sometimes it still got to him, the way she didn't seem to really see him. Then about 2 weeks ago, Zach had asked him to come over to deliver some letter he'd written to Ruby. Use a stamp, Simon had thought, but he agreed to do it anyway. Later, though, his jealousy got to him. When he ran into Tobin on the way downstairs, Simon told him about it, just for spite. Then Tobin went up there and gave it to Ruby pretty good. Simon still felt bad. He didn't want Ruby to know he double-crossed her the way he did. After draining the last of his beer, Simon went back to his apartment. He didn't know what else to do, and he just had to get some real sleep or he would drop. His roommate and what's-her-name told him the lady cop had been by a second time. Then the two of them went out again, raving the town, all dressed up in their hippie beads and rose-colored glasses. Simon sat in the chair by the window, watching the streets. Just as he decided the cop had given up for the day, and that it was safe for him to sleep, he saw that wild shock of red hair coming toward his building. He waited until he heard her clumping up the stairs, and then he climbed out the window again and headed back to the Crazy Z.